outside looking at 63 Corvette right here and looking at the actual car and then putting the whole story together, it makes so much sense to me.
Well, now that you've learned a little background, but it's hard to believe that when this car was originally designed, I designed it in 1957. So it took 6 years from the time that we made the first sketch to go through all the political machinations and all the engineering and everything it took to decide to build a car, because there was a lot of resistance within management to go back and build Corvettes. They'd already cut off the program. But it was such a great design, because Bill Mitchell was really the guy that directed the design. I'm simply interpreting what he wanted to do. But it became very, very successful, and they sold. It was the first time they'd ever really made money selling Corvettes, and that made management very happy. And it's still a great selling car, you know. So it was a real honor to work on it, and I still am really proud of this car.
So the car came out to the market, and how was the number of sales?
Well, remember, this is the second Corvette. It's called the C2 model. The C1 model was the first one that was introduced in 1954. So when that car was introduced in 54, everybody thought it was a major, major deal, because General Motors had come out with the Corvette. Ford came out with the Thunderbird in 1955 and blew everybody away, because it was a steel body, it had roll up and down windows. It was far more acceptable to the American public because it wasn't as racy as the Corvette. It had a greater appeal. And they outsold that Corvette almost 15-1. So that was one reason that General Motors wanted to quit building the Corvette, because it was a loser. Ford was blowing their doors off. But Bill Mitchell came back with this car and immediately went back and took the crown away from Ford Motor Company. So it went back and forth with Ford, and then Ford finally gave up, and they went into a big four-seater, which sold very, very well again, but they got out of the sports car market. And that's why later they came back with Shelby, with the Cobra, because they were able to get into the sports car market for very little money, because the cars were built in England by AC, and then we put Ford engines in them, and they were faster than the Corvette, so that became the new king on the road. And then we took and did the Mustangs, and that became the hot car. And then GM came out with the Camaro. So we have the pony car wars, and that had, you know, all of the great fabulous cars that were done by Chrysler as well.
Now we are looking at this 64 Cobra, and this is the Peter that designed. So what's the story about this car?
Well, as we explained before, this is the Daytona Cobra, and originally we only made 6 of these cars, and they were built on the standard Cobra chassis. But the big advantage was that aerodynamically it was superior. So it would go almost 200 miles per hour, and it was 25% more fuel efficient, which is what made it very, very successful. And with this design and Shelby's team, we won the World Championship in 1965, defeating Ferrari, which was a major, major change, because until that point, they had been pretty dominant in Europe against Jaguar and against Aston Martin and Maserati. And so this was a major, major change. And we did it with a production engine. I mean, this is the engine that came right out of a Ford Fairlane sedan, and we're running against real sophisticated racing engines. So we had an advantage in cubic inches. We had 4.7 cubic inches, or 4.7 liters versus 3 liters for the Ferrari. But they didn't believe that a production engine, you know, with push rods could beat an overhead cam Ferrari, because they could turn those engines up around 8,500, and we were turning maybe 6,500 with the push rods. But we had the advantage of cubic inches. So it was a great battle between the two, and it was aerodynamics really that won the race for us.
The one before, the 63, it's a different make, different year, but we talked about this whole window portion, like it's 2 panels into one. Now looking at this car, it's a really large open rear window.
Very much so, yeah. That was one of the interesting design solutions for the car, because if that had been designed with a sort of a conventional shaped rear window, it would have looked very, very heavy in the back end. But by making it transparent, you can see the space that goes through the car. That's really the best look on the car, is the rear three-quarters. But that whole idea of the chopped off tail was so foreign at the time that I proposed it, that most of the guys in the shop refused to work on it. They thought it was so ugly. But luckily we had a small group of guys that went for the idea, and as soon as it went fast, then everybody understood how important that shape was, and that became the style, and everybody began to chop. Now the important thing to do is, if you look at every car on the street today, they go back and chopped off tail. Look at a Toyota Prius, you know, same thing. If you look at the shape from the side, it's the Daytona coupe.
Now I see your name on it.
Yeah.
So next we're gonna talk about 240Z, the little transition from
From the Cobra.
Cobra
Right. Yeah.
to Japanese car. You're looking at 240Z Datsun behind us, and now I see Peter stripes.
Well, it's very interesting because they took the idea of the stripes, but this time we ran them down the side of the car for identity, because you can see it very good from the side of the car. So I've used that twin stripe theme on these cars when we took over the factory racing team. So all of the cars that BRE raced all had the twin stripes, but they ran sideways down the car. But this is such a lovely design. This is designed by a guy named Matsuo in Japan, who did the car for Nissan, and it became a real classic. It's just one of the great, great looking cars, and that's why I still decided that I had to have one, and went back and restored this one here at BRE. So it looks identical to the race cars that we had, where we ran the original red, white, and blue livery on it. This time we toned it down a little bit. We ran the Sebring silver. This silver is the same thing that was on that Corvette. That's Sebring silver. So there's a tie-in here on that.
Wow.
So to have we came in with the Sebring silver that we had on the Corvette, but used it with this theme on the car. So it all has a little bit of, same thing from one to another.
Peter element.
So, but this is really, it was just a beautiful car, and they're just climbing in value because it's very much like the Stingray Corvette. There just aren't a lot of them left, and even though there were many thousands of these built, they were so popular, and a lot of them were trashed, they were broken up. So to have one in really nice production shape today is pretty valuable. So it's considered one of the great designs of the world, and all they'll do is increase in value because they are such a beautiful design.
So after you got this car, did you personally add anything other than the how it came out originally from the
production
factory?
car. Well, it's interesting because in production car racing, the car, in the rules at that time, the car had to be the exact same body that came from the factory, but they did allow you to make some changes. The changes were pretty much unseen, that were mechanical changes to the engine and the gearbox, but you could also change and put lighter, wider wheels and bigger tires on it. So we began to make these wheels and tire combinations for this car, and then a lot of things like the aerodynamic, what we call the front air dam on the car, and the rear spoiler improved the aerodynamics on the car so that it would handle its speed a lot better. Because if you take this car up and run it at the speeds that we're running for a race car, the front end tends to get light with the air flowing over it. So it's got a chin spoiler on it that keeps the front end down. So when you're going through a really fast bend, it doesn't go straight off the road, it sticks to the road on it. So these parts that are on the car are things that we made for BRE for all of the people that have 240Zs. So it was a chance to use all of the production race car parts on the street, and identified the car again with the side stripes as a performance car.
So let's go take a look at the next racing development, Datsun 510. Now you're looking at a 510 Datsun right behind us.
Well, the Datsun 510 is the car that really brought the attention to the Japanese cars in America, because Mr. Katayama realized that by putting some really good engineering into the car. And we're using basically the same design engine that we used in the 240Z. So we had all the development from the 240Z engine we could put into this car, and almost instantly the car was the winner. And because it had four-wheel independent suspension, disc brakes in the front, it was as good a performer as any of the Alfa Romeos or BMWs that cost 3 or 4 times as much. So you could go out and for $3,500 buy a Datsun 510, which is a really handsome little car, and with special wheels on it, a little work on the motor, special gearbox. It was as hot a race car as you could get at that time. So this has always been one of my very, very favorite cars because it's an inexpensive car, and yet it's a very elegant design for an econobox. I mean, it was supposed to be a little four-door sedan. Now, this particular car here is kind of reverts back to a lot of my beginning hot rod image. So where it originally came with a 1600cc or an 1800cc engine in it, I've changed this engine. It has a big American V8 in it now. So it's really, really fast. So it's a real sleeper. It's dead quiet on the street. You have no idea how much horsepower. It puts out 300 horsepower at the rear wheels. So, and yet it's dead quiet and really fun to drive. So let me show you the engine.
Please do.
So this is a really kind of a trick putting this big Chevy engine in here because obviously it's about twice the size of the original engine. So the firewall was cut out and the whole engine was shoved back so that the balance of the car would be good. So instead of sitting in where I normally sit if it was a four-door sedan, I'm now sitting almost in the back seat. So it's very much like a sports car. It's now a coupe for 2 people instead of a sedan for 4 people. So from the outside, it still looks like the little four-door sedan, but from the inside, when you sit down in it, it's a sports car. So it's really a fun combination.
I don't know what to say. This is just different from anything else, but it sits so nicely.
Yeah. Well, it's again American hot rod technology combined with a great Japanese car, so it's really fun. So they all tie together. California hot rod technology is still the great thing, but using the latest overhead valve engine, fuel injected Chevy engine makes a great combination.
This is excellent. So with all this knowledge and experience you have in office designing cars, and you have experience driving cars, and what new venture do you have?
Well, it's kind of really fun for us because when I designed my Daytona, I had to have some way to haul it around, and I realized that I needed a trailer. So I went to all the trailer manufacturers and said, can you build a trailer that I think should be aerodynamic and lightweight? And no trailer manufacturer could build a trailer the way we wanted. So I designed and built our own trailer. And as soon as we got one done, people asked, well, can you build another one? Can you build another one? And so pretty soon we were in limited production, and then finally we set up our own factory here in Henderson. So we now build the Aerovault trailer. So let me take you over and show you that.